The last class. That morning, I was very late for school, so I was terribly afraid of a scolding, particularly since Master Hamel had said that he would examine us on participles, and I knew not the first word about them. For a little while, I thought of playing truant and wandering the fields. The day was so warm, so clear. I could hear the blackbirds whistling on the edge of the woods, and behind the sawmill, in the ribbit field, the Prussian soldiers were drilling. All of this was much more tempting to me than the rules of participles, but I was strong enough to resist, and off to school I ran as fast as I could. As I passed by the mayor's office, I observed that a number of people assembled before the little board on which notices were generally posted. For 2 years, every piece of bad news had come from that board. Defeats in battle, conscriptions, orders from headquarters, and, without stopping, I wondered, what can it be this time? Just then, as I was running across the square, walked the blacksmith, who with his apprentice stood reading the placard, called after me.
"You needn't hurry so fast, my boy. You'll get to school soon enough."
I thought he was making game of me, and I kept right on, reaching Master Hamel's little yard quite out of breath. Usually when school started, the noise was so loud it could be heard from the street. Desks opening and closing, students repeating lessons together, some covering their ears to focus, and the teacher's stick tapping on the desks.
"A little quietness."
I had counted on all this noise to enable me to reach my seat unnoticed, but on that particular day, everything was as quiet as a Sabbath morning. Through the open window, I saw my schoolmates already ranged in their places, and Master Hamel pacing to and fro, his formidable iron ferrule under his arm. In the midst of that complete silence, I had to open the door and go in. You can well imagine whether I blushed and was afraid. But quite to the contrary, Master Hamel looked at me with no sign of anger, and then very gently said,
"Go directly to your seat, my little Franz. We are about to begin without you."
Immediately, I stepped over the bench and sat down on my desk. Only then, when I had partly gotten over my fright, did I observe that our master was wearing his handsome blue riding coat, his plaited ruff, and his black silk-embroidered breeches, worn only on inspection days or when prizes were awarded. Furthermore, there was something extraordinary, something solemn, about the whole school. But what astounded me more than anything else was to see the number of people from the village sitting, as silent as we, on the usually empty benches at the back of the room. Old Father Halser in his three-cornered hat, the ex-mayor, the former postman, besides a number of others. All seemed cast down, and Father Halser had brought with him an old primer, with chewed-up leaves, which he held wide open upside down on his knees, and lying it on his huge spectacles. While I was marvelling at all this, Master Hamel had mounted his platform, and in the same gentle and serious voice with which he had greeted me, he said to us,
"My children, this is the last day that I shall keep school. The order has come from Berlin that nothing but German shall be taught in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine. The new schoolmaster will arrive tomorrow. This is the last class in French. I beg of you to be very attentive."
His simple last words overwhelmed me. This, then, was the notice they had posted at the mayor's office. Oh, the scoundrels! My last lesson in French! And I was scarcely able to write. Then I was never to learn. I must stop short just where I was. How angry with myself it made me to remember the last time I had frittered away, and the lessons I had missed while hunting bird's nest or sliding on the saw. My books now seemed to me like old comrades from whom it broke my heart to part, in only a moment since I had found them. My grammar, my sacred history, so dull and so heavy to carry. It was just the same when I thought of Master Hamel. He was going away. I should never see him again. The thought made me forget all his punishments and strokes with the ferule. Poor old man! So it was in honour of that last lesson in French that he had donned his Sunday best, and now I understood why those old folks from the village were seated at the back of the room. It seemed to say they regretted that they had not visited the school often. Besides, it was a sort of way of thanking our teacher for his 40 years of devoted service, and of showing their love for the fatherland which was passing away. Just at this point in my reflections, I heard my name called. It was my turn to recite. Oh, I would have given anything to be able to recite without a slip, in a strong, clear voice, that celebrated rule about participles. But at the very first words, I grew confused, and I only stood there at my bench swaying back and forward, my heart swelling, not daring to lift my hand. At length I heard Master Hamel saying to me,
"My little Franz, I shall not scold you. You are punished enough, I think. It is so with all of us. Every day we reassure ourselves. Bah! I have plenty of time. Tomorrow I shall learn. Then you see what happens. Alas! It has ever been the great misfortune of Alsace to defer its lessons until tomorrow. And now these people are justified in saying to us, 'What, you pretend to be French, and you are able neither to speak nor write in your language? But in all this you are not the most guilty one, my poor Franz. We are all worthy of a full measure of self-reproach. Your parents have not taken enough care to see that you got an education. They prefer to save a few more sous by putting you to work in the fields or in the factories. And have I nothing for which to blame myself? Have I not frequently sent you to water my garden instead of keeping you at your books? Or have I ever hesitated to dismiss school when I wanted to go trout fishing?'
So Master Hamel, passing from one theme to another, began to speak to us about a French language. He said it was the most beautiful language in the whole world, the most clear, the most substantial, that we must ever cherish it among ourselves, and never forget it, for when a nation falls into bondage, just so long as it clings to its language, it holds the key of its prison. Then he picked up a grammar book and read our lesson to us. I was astonished to see how readily I understood. Everything he said seemed to me so easy, so very easy. I believe that never before had I listened so attentively, and that he, in turn, had never explained things with such infinite patience. It almost seemed as though the poor fellow wished to impart all his knowledge to us before he left us, to drive it all into our heads with one blow. The lesson ended, we went on to the exercises in penmanship. For that day, Master Hamel had gotten ready some entirely new copies, on which he had written in neat, round hand, "France, Alsace, France, Alsace." The slips of paper looked like tiny flags, waving all about the room and hanging from the rods of our desks. You should have seen how diligently everyone worked, and how quiet it was. Only the scratching of pens over the paper could be heard. Once some beetles flew in, but nobody paid any attention to them, not even the very smallest chaps who were struggling to draw their oblique lines with the will and application, as sincere as though even the lines themselves were French. Pigeons cooed in low tones on the roof of the schoolhouse, and as I listened to them, I thought to myself, I wonder if they are going to make them coo in German too. Now and then I lifted my eyes from my task. I saw Master Hamel seated motionless in his chair and staring at things about him, as though in that look he would carry away with him the whole of his little schoolhouse. Think of it, for 40 years he had occupied that same place, his yard in front of him and his school always unchanged. Only the benches and desks were rubbed by use until they were polished. The walnuts in the yard had grown large, and the hop vine he himself had planted now hung in festoons from the windows clear to the roof. How heartbreaking it must have been for that poor man to leave all this, to hear his sister moving back and forth in the room above as she packed their trunks. Next day they were going away, to leave the fatherland forever. All the same, he had the courage to keep the school to the very closing minute. After the writing was finished, we had a history lesson. Then the little ones sang in unison their ba, be, bi, bo, boo. Yonder, at the back of the room, old Father Hauser was holding his spelling book with both hands, and with the aid of his great spectacles, he spelled out the letters. One could see that even he too was applying himself. Emotion shook his voice, and to hear him was so droll that we wanted to laugh and to cry. Ah, I shall always remember that last class. Suddenly, the church clock sounded 12, then the Angelus. At the same instant were heard under our very windows the trumpets of the Prussians returning from drill. Pale as death, Master Hamel rose from his chair. Never had he seemed so large.
"My friends,"
he began.
"My friends, I...
But something choked him. He could not end the sentence. Then he turned to the blackboard, seized a piece of chalk, and bearing with all his strength, he wrote in the largest letters he could make, "Vive la France!" Then he stood there, his head leaning against the wall, and without a word, he signed to us with his hand.
"It is the end. Go."